Hey guys, so today I wanted to show you what I think is a somewhat unique take on the Azamina and Fiendsmith cards using a White Forest sub-engine. If you're new to my channel, I try to have more specific or unusual analyses instead of just going over generic combos like saying, oh, here is the latest, Deception of the Sinful Spoils combo or whatever. Most of my followers are White Forest enjoyers because that's how I started my channel. But if you like the content or the unique, I hope, analysis, then like and subscribe. If you don't, then don't do that. Okay, so the format of this video is I want to explain the theory behind this, the reason for the ratios, and then I want to show you some sample combos that give you an idea of how these cards interact with each other. So the first thing that stands out that you may be looking at is there are 3 Sphere Modes and 3 Lava Golems in the main deck. Now, these cards, obviously, conflict with your normal summon. I'm going to get to that in a second. But first of all, let me just say, right now, pre-Rage of the Abyss, the best deck is Fiendsmith Yubel. The stats from YCS Lille, so the YCS that's happening in France right now, have come out for the top 32 about an hour ago. We have, in the top 32, it is, let me double check real quick, 34% Fiendsmith Yubel, 16% Tenpai, and then a major drop-off after that. In fact, the fire decks are in the other category right now. Post-Rage of the Abyss, Snake Eyes is going to come back because we're going to be seeing the Azamina Fiendsmith Snake Eyes deck. So what does that mean? If you are not playing Fiendsmith Yubel or Fiendsmith Azamina Yubel or Fiendsmith Azamina Snake Eyes or all of the Abomination Chimera decks, then you have to have a way to not immediately lose to the extremely powerful end boards that are usually not going to lose to hand traps, and also often have really good ways of playing around breakers. Against Yubel, for example, they can reliably use Desiree to stop your Dark Ruler by chaining the Escape or the Abomination's Chamber, whatever those Unchained traps were called, I forgot. Yeah, Escape of the Unchained and Abominable Chamber. And then they chain the Desiree to that and then negate your Dark Ruler, and then you need like another breaker. And then they're still going to have follow-up. Same thing with the Snake Eyes stuff. They often will have good follow-up and different ways of playing around, like later interruptions with the Princess in the Grave and stuff like that. So how do you beat those broken decks without playing a broken deck, but not hamstringing yourself into just a bad deck? Because you might be like, well, if I'm going to be playing the Fiendsmith cards and the Azamina cards, shouldn't I just spend money to get, like the Snake Eyes stuff or just play the actual best deck? Now, here's the thing. Sphere Mode and Lava Golem are actually really good against these decks. Sphere Mode in particular. If you think of a standard Yubel end board right now, you're looking at Desiree for sure, and in this type of build, right, they're basically going interrupted most of the time. So there's going to be a Desiree, okay, there's going to be a Wave Hiking Caesar. If they're playing Verudris, there's probably going to be a Verudris. There's probably going to be 1 or 2 Phantoms of Yubel. They're going to have access to the Unchained Soul of Rage, and then they're going to have maybe Escape or Abominable Chamber. And you're not beating that with hand traps most of the time. And you're also not beating it with breakers, at least like in the long game as the game goes on, a lot of the time, because that deck is super hard to beat once they're fully established. If you just Sphere Mode, you get rid of, for example, the Desiree, you get rid of the Wave Hiking Caesar, you get rid of the Verudris, and then you leave them on 1 or 2 Phantoms of Yubel. Now that becomes doable all of a sudden. Or if you're playing against Fiendsmith, Azamina, Snake Eyes, maybe they have like also a Desiree and a Wave Hiking Caesar, and then they have maybe like Masquerena or whatever it is that they're going for, and you Sphere Mode that, you're also looking to be in a much better position. So this is really thinking about non-engine and what non-engine is good against the current meta. Now, I'm obviously not saying that you're going to see this deck winning a YCS, because most people who are trying to win a YCS aren't going to be playing White Forest, but I think this is a somewhat competitive take on the deck, thinking about what the actual meta options are right now. Okay, that being said, I didn't want to include other normals in the deck that conflict. So the Stellar, it conflicts with our normal summons, and also this card is substantially worse if you don't draw it in combination with the toy cards, because if you get Impermed or Veilered and you haven't sent like a soldier, then you're really in trouble and you need an extender in hand, otherwise you're going to suffer. So any deck that is playing a bunch of hand traps, this card is not value if you don't have a really high value send off of it. Now, I am still playing a normal summon because you can access this with most hands because it is searchable off of so many cards. So you don't have to draw it. You can get it off of the LZ. You can get it off of the Tails. You can get it off of the Arcia or the Arciela, sorry. And when you're going first, you're obviously not going to be using the Golem or the Sphere mode. So usually if you've drawn one of these cards going first, you either think that you need to save it for the following turn for the grind, or you're going to be tributing it off of Deception to do the Deception combo. And then if you go second and you happen to draw the Sylvie in combination with one of these two cards, which is it's about an 8% chance of happening when you go second. But I'll take those chances every single time because I think it's worth it to still play this searchable normal summon for when you're going first. In terms of the rest of the non-engine, I am testing out Subversion because you have so many ways to access the Witch, either by drawing the Witch, by accessing it through Wanted, or using like a Deception combo to get the Murcielago, and then that gets you into the Witch by searching the Wanted. And so I thought that maybe you should have another target for the Witch. And this is obviously not something that you're going to be activating if you go first. But, unless they've done something weird, like made a Bestial or something. But I think it's maybe worth playing because it's so flexible and searchable. And then going second, you have like a main deck option aside from just these cards, the Golem and the Sphere mode. Now, I am still opting to play the Nibiru and the Veiler. I think that maybe... See, if I could play 4 Sphere modes, I would probably play 4 Sphere modes. I haven't decided if there's some other breaker that I want to play instead of the Nib or some other non-engine card. But these are here because in the standard combo that I'll show you in a second, you can easily search the Veiler through the Arciela, obviously. And you can search the Nib off of the Gallant Granite. And that does come up pretty often, especially if you see the toy cards. Also remember that if you have access to Box and you have access to Witch, then you also have access to your White Forest stuff because the Witch can send the Soldier, and if you have Box, the Soldier searches the Sylvie, for example. Now, the one thing that I'm not really sure about, obviously you can make debates over should you change out the Snip for something else? Should you really be playing the Subversion? Should you be playing one Rusia? There are things that you can argue for here. I do like the 2-tracked because if you don't have a search target and you have an Engraver in hand, then it's kind of stuck there unless you special it out inefficiently with Requiem. So I like having the second tracked in deck. I feel like that's worth playing. I have opted for a larger Fiendsmith package in the extra deck because I'm playing an actual Fiendsmith package here with the 3 Engraver, the 2 tracks, and the 1 Lurie. But that means that you don't have as much flexibility with the White Forest extra deck. Because we're also playing Granite, it means that you do have to make some decisions on what to cut. I really wanted to play Zapper Shrimp. I think that this card gives really good utility that you don't have. Partly because you get the Speller Trap pop, which can be really useful, and partly because you can choose when you want to go into a Chaos Angel out of turn with the Diabel. But I still think that the Chaos Angel is worth playing because you do have lots of ways to make it. Like, it could be that you have an Engraver or you have a Necroquip and then like any of the 4s that you would normally have, which don't have to be tuners either. So I feel like you should still play the Chaos Angel. I think you basically have to play the Silvera if you're playing this package because that's what you're going to be bringing off of Woes or Diabel. And this is still important to the combo for searching Veiler or the Trap or whatever else. And the Diabel is, I think, like maybe even better than people think it is because you don't have to ladder into this normally. You could be stuck on something weird like you normal summon Rusia and you send Tank and you just make it raw off of that, and then you send something in your opponent's turn. Okay, so I think that's enough for now for going over the stuff, but it's just worth saying that you do have to make decisions with the extra deck, and there are lots of things you have to cut. I do think that Silhouette is really good in this deck because you will be in situations where you have 2 bodies that you could turn into whatever, and it would be nice to have the Silhouette, but I feel like it really messes with your main deck ratios if you start putting in like Azaroon or Silhouette Trick. So I feel like this is probably better in the side. And then if you're going first, you have to make a decision on what you're going to take out. Like, are you going to take out, for example, the Sol and the Debtors and maybe put in like the Rabbit and an Azaroon. And maybe you also take out the Subversion and then you put in the Hat Trick. So yeah, there are, you know, trade-offs. And there is one other thing worth mentioning. So against Tenpai, it is useful to have this card. Maybe against some other decks as well. I saw Yassine was using this because he thought it might have been good against Runic. I've mostly found this to be useful against Tenpai. So you could, because this is searchable, consider playing this in the side as well. Yeah, okay, now let's get into the combos because we're already 10 minutes into the actual profile. Okay, so first of all, let me show you what the synergy is if you draw Box and then you have any access to Witch, like I said, which is through many, many different types of cards. So here we're going to activate Box. We're going to set, we only have 2 targets. We have 1 tank and 1 soldier because there's not a lot of space for more soldiers and we're not playing a super high White Forest count. So we don't want to just draw a soldier, then search the box and have nothing to get value off of. So, okay, now we summon the Witch by sending the soldier. The soldier brings itself out, and this Witch is going to be giving access to the Deception, which is, you know, all the Azamina stuff. Now the soldier can search us for the Sylvie because we have the box. So the Sylvie, usually you will always search the woes first, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. Okay, so here we're going to activate Deception, and oftentimes what you want to do, or at least I've found, is I like to make Wave Hiking Caesar first, but if you feel like there's not much of a difference between going for the Azamina Silvera versus the Wave Hiking, then I guess do whatever. But sometimes the sequencing does matter because you want certain things in your grave first. So we're going to be doing the Closed Heaven line, and I will explain the Necroquip stuff later if you've already drawn the Fiendsmith cards. So here we make the Wave Hiking Caesar. And now I'm going to be using the LZ. I reset the woes. I special out the Rusia, and Rusia sends the tank here. Here we go for the Arciela, and the Arciela will usually search us the Veiler unless we needed something else like the woes. Here we make Gallant Granite, and we search for the Nib. So because we had access to the Veiler, the Nib is particularly good, and this means that we don't just lose to things like Dark Ruler or whatever. We have good cards in our hand, and we have stuff that floats. Like we have the Woes of the White Forest, so we're going to have access to the Rusia or the Sylvie out of turn by shuffling this back, whatever happens, even if we nib ourselves. And then we have like other recursion stuff like the Deception, which will often, in most turns, reset itself during the end phase, and we can continue looping through our Azamina stuff. So I'm going first, so I tribute the Lava Golem, but you could, depending on what you're going for, or if you don't need these as link material, you could have gotten rid of the Arciela or the Gallant Granite. And here I activate the Hollowed Azamina, so now I bring out the Omni Negate, so we have the Azamina Silvera on the field. And here I make a Little Knight, but, you know, if you're playing any other, like, placeholder Link 2, like if you were maining the Silhouette Trick and you're going first, obviously, you could just put the Silhouette Trick here or whatever. So here what you end up having is that the Deception comes back in the end phase, and you have, what this deck is supposed to give you is Wave Hiking and the Azamina Silvera every single turn plus something else. And then you have the White Forest stuff in rotation. So here is the explanation for the reason why you would play the White Forest stuff to begin with, is you've diversified the locations of your interactions so that it's in your spell and trap zone. You have stuff in your graveyard that gives you value. And you also have interactions in your hand that you've searched through the combo. And then obviously in your opponent's turn, I'm just showing you that you can bring out the Silvera, and you always want to remember that you are going to be cycling through all of your resources. So you're always going to be adding back the LZ. You're always going to be resetting the Deception. Everything you can do if you... So I didn't want to put the Deception in the... Sometimes you don't want to put the Deception in the grave and shuffle it back with the Wanted, because you want to have the Deception reset itself for later use. That's just worth thinking about. So that's the first basic combo if you've drawn the Box and the Black Witch access. Now, I wanted to show what happens if you draw the Fiendsmith stuff and the Deception stuff, or, you know, just the Azamina engine and the Fiendsmith engine together. Is a little bit different to if you have to go through just Closed Heaven lines. Now, you may be wondering, if you drew the Engraver, why would you be going for the Necroquip line? Why not just, for example, keep resources in your extra deck and you just bring back out the Engraver immediately, and then the 2 Engravers go into the Wave Hiking Caesar? So let me run you through this combo real quick. So just to refresh you here, we've used the Necroquip line. Okay, so it's Necroquip and Engraver here. And we have an Engraver still in the grave also with our Requiem. Okay, so just remember that. Okay, now we are going for the Azamina line. So we bring out the Murcielago, which I was reminded in my comments section. Murcielago is bat in Spanish, and I never noticed that there were bats in the picture. There actually are bats in the picture. Okay. So you could like just straight up use hallowed Azamina, sorry, to bring out the Silvera. But I find like it's more efficient to just get more bodies before you do that. And I'll show you why in a second. Always remember, okay, this is another important thing about the resource game, that this card says during the end phase, if this card is in the grave because it was sent there from the spell and trap zone, this turn, while face up, you can set it. If you just send this from your hand, or you've set it to your spell and trap zone and you send it, you're not going to get this back. So you may find that you've already used Deception in your turn and you have like another one, or you've searched or drawn another one, and you still activate it so it's face up, so that when you send it either off of the Witch or off of a White Forest card, you will in fact get it in the end phase. Okay, now I go into Closed Heaven here. And the reason you'll see in a moment that we went into the Necroquip is about to come up. But also what's worth noting is that we instead of just making the Azamina Silvera immediately, we wanted to have a body, the Murcielago, in the grave so that I had something to shuffle back to add Azamina back to hand. Okay. So now I banish the Wanted for a draw, and I end up getting the Luri. And now here, because you can add back the Azamina once per turn, you still get to bring out the Azamina Silvera. Here I normal summon the Luri, and I go for a sequence. Now remember that the sequence only needs one of the monsters to be a light fiend monster. I didn't know I was going to draw into the Luri, but I made Moon of the Closed Heaven because it was going to be a light fiend, and any other access to any other monster was going to give me enough materials to make the Fiendsmith sequence. And this is what brings us to, why did I use the Necroquip line when I already drew Engraver and I didn't have to use this for my extra deck? And the reason is, if you have both Engravers as materials under your Wave Hiking Caesar, then unless they like nib you and you detach an Engraver, you have nothing in the grave to shuffle back. But now we activate Sequence, and we see the Engraver, we have Requiem, we have Luri, and we have Moon, and we shuffle back to summon the Desiree, and then we equip the Sequence to the Desiree. So that is the reason that you would use the Necroquip line even if you have drawn access to that card. So this is basically what happens if you cannot get the White Forest cards and you're stuck with the Azamina and Fiendsmith engines, and you've drawn both of those. So this is typically what you want to end with. You also typically will have set it up in such a way that the Deception will be resetting itself in the end phase. But I conceded in the main phase one. Okay. Let's go for the last combo here. So if you don't draw any of the Fiendsmith stuff, because obviously I don't want to show you the deck in case where you draw like every single engine that you want. So you don't have access to the Fiendsmith cards. So there's no Engrave, there's no Tract or whatever, okay? So you've drawn the White Forest stuff and you've drawn the Azamina stuff, basically. So here we start with the Deception. Now what's really important to note here is if people start playing Ghost Ogre, you want to keep that in mind and have a play, have like some type of play. Now this says you can only use each effect of Deception once per turn. So like if you get Ogred when you're trying to do it, you're not going to be able to use this again to search the Hallowed Azamina. Okay, so now we activate Hallowed and we bring out Murcielago, and again, like you can technically just use Hallowed to immediately bring out the Azamina Silvera to have the Omni Negate, but if we were to do that, you would see that we actually do not have any spells and traps right now in the hand, and we have no way to add back the Hallowed Azamina without getting rid of the monster that we have on the field, which would be super inefficient. So here we search for the Wanted. Here we special the Witch, so we want to get more bodies, right? It's not like, okay, now we have a spell or trap in hand, we can finally go for the White Forest stuff. We want to get as much value as possible. So we search for the wanted off of the Murcielago, and now we dump that to Special the Witch. So this is still giving us the Speller Trap, okay? We haven't lost access to the Speller Trap. Now remember that this only sets itself if it was sent while it was face up from the Speller Trap zone. We don't want to just send it with LZ while it's set, otherwise it's not going to reset itself in the end phase. Okay, so now we go for Moon of the Closed Heaven. Remember that we always want some Azamina card in the graveyard for this to add itself back. We don't want to have to get rid of something on our field. Then it's like, what's the point of even making the monster? Okay, so here we go for, now we have to do the Necroquip line. There's no choice because we didn't draw into the Fiendsmith stuff. Now we have an Azamina monster in the graveyard, so we can use Hallowed, shuffle that back, add the Hallowed back to hand. Okay. So now we draw here and we actually draw into a spell. And you may be thinking, oh, you got super lucky you drew into a spell. But this deck, like most of the deck is searchable. And so you're thinning your deck all the time. And you're often going to draw into cards that you actually want to have. Usually the only draws that are like not optimal if you're going first would be like a Golem or a Sphere Mode that don't help you continue your combo. Or if you're really unlucky, a Subversion. Because those cards only help you in the grind or like, you know, on the crackback, which is not like bad if you can survive, but usually you will be drawing into useful cards. So because we drew the Tails, we're obviously not going to send the Deception because we want to use that for the Hallowed Azamina. So we send the Tails and we search for the Sylvie and the Tails resets itself. And now remember, okay, because this is basically our only actual normal summon, obviously you can normal the Rusia, you can normal the LZ, it's not illegal. But this is our only like true normal summon that we can search with almost every hand that gives us access to the White Forest stuff. So we've searched this. This is why it's in the deck. And now we have gotten access to the Woes. And you can, you know, obviously send the Woes and reset the Woes. And here we've drawn into a Golem. So this is also kind of normal. We're now 28 cards left in our main deck. So it's, you know, pretty likely that we will draw into a Sphere Mode or a Golem at some point. Here we make the Arciela. And we search for the Veiler. We don't really need the Tails at this point. You'll see why. And here, this is really just like a placeholder link to. Because you didn't draw access to the Fiendsmith stuff, you don't have an engraver engrave unless, again, like, because pay attention, if they nib you and you detach the engraver, depending on what you drew, you may be in a different scenario, but you can't actually just turn the Closed Heaven and a random body into sequence to go into Desiree because you don't have an engraver engrave. So just think of this as like a placeholder link too. This could be a silhouette. You could have been making the SP right now or whatever. Now here we activate Hallowed Azamina because we still have a Deception face up, and we make the Azamina Silvera. So in the end phase now, the Deception will come back, which is great. That's what we want. Remember that we have the Arciela Engrave, so our Woes combo is live. And if I go to the opponent's turn, then we bring out this card. Let's go back to check field. So we bring out the regular Silvera and we add back. Never forget your resource game. You're still sticking to the game plan of looping resources. This is actually one of the reasons why it's not that bad if you draw the Golem or the Sphere Mode if you're going first, is that you are not OTKing. Like, this is not like your opponent just concedes immediately. You are cycling through resources and playing a slow game where both the Azamina cards and the White Forest cards and the Fiendsmith cards, all three of your engines, are actually good at grinding. So do not forget to add back your LZ. You're not playing a Stellar, so you're not going to be cycling through that. You cannot forget the LZ. This is on your opponent's turn. You cannot forget to fuel your grave with the Arciela, normally the Arciela, so that you have something to make the Woes live, and you can actually Synchro Summon. So as I said, the Moon here in this scenario was just a placeholder link to. It would have been, in my version of the deck, the Silhouette Rabbit if you were siding and then going first. If you're maining it, then it would have been that. Otherwise, I think in my version of the deck, it would probably just be the SP because you're already maining that no matter what. Now, the reason that I mentioned that it's really important that the Deception is reset is if you were, for example, going for, instead of Silvera, like let's say they're playing a deck where they can contact fuse, like Ritual Beast, which I hate, and or they're playing like Chimera or Branded, where like it doesn't really matter that much if you book them because they can still like fuse with the materials, then this card may not be very good. And so you may instead opt for going for another Arciela and searching another Veiler if you want to play more Veilers, so that you actually would be, because Veiler's not once per turn, you would have like 2 Veilers. And those are, remember, interruptions from your hand, so they can't do anything against this. Like if they Dark Gorilla you 17 times, they haven't taken the Veilers out of your hand. So remember that This is important not just because it's an option for the crackback where you can use this and potentially go into like more Azamina plays. It is also extremely important that you are keeping not only like the LZ and the White Forest cards in rotation, but you have a spell and trap in rotation. So that if you make an Arciela, then you can get a search off of it, like for another Veiler. Or if you didn't search Veiler, if you're only playing one, because you had to search a combo piece, and then you search Veiler out of turn, you're one Veiler and you use that Veiler. Or if you were making the Diabel. Now, what I've found in testing this deck is that I often do not make Diabel in my turn, but what you often can do is if you just made the Arciela and you end up not linking it off, as long as you have access to woes, this will work the same way, where you could have Arciela, you leave it there on your field, your opponent plays, and then you activate woes and you summon out an LZ and you turn the LZ and the Arciela into a Diabel on their turn. And then in this scenario, you would still be able to use this trigger and add back a spell or trap from your graveyard to your hand. And you would still have Deception on the field that would be an option for a send off of the Diabel. But because it is set when you send it this time, it would not be resetting itself in the end phase. But at least you have the option of like, do you add back Tails when you summon Diabel out of turn and that's what you send and you keep the Deception? Or maybe you've added back a card like Hallowed Azamina, or it could be something else that you really want to keep, and then you need the option of having another spell and trap to send. Okay, so I hope that this has made sense to you. I think that this is a decent attempt at trying to find non-engine cards that will allow us to beat meta decks. But I do not consider this an optimized version of the deck. For example, I think that if you're playing multiple Nibiru in a deck where you cannot realistically expect to draw another hand trap with it, the value of the Nibiru goes down, but the hand trap is still good. Usually what will happen, and I would consider this a worthy trade, is that many decks, unless your opponent is playing on a budget, are simply going to be going to rush the Wave Hiking Caesar through the Necroquip line like every single time. Like most decks are going to be doing this regardless of what their core engines are. And the Nib, at least when they have the Necroquip and the Engraver on field, the Nib is going to get rid of those cards, and so they don't get the Wave Hiking Caesar. So I do think that trade is worth it. So even though the Nibiru is not like a game-ending card or something like that, it doesn't like massively shift the game in your favor. It does stop you having to play through this. So if like hypothetically you're playing like triple Nib or something, let's say maybe you took out the Subversion or whatever, and you don't draw a Sphere Mode or a Golem, you may be thinking, I would rather at least have a Nib, so at least I don't have to play through the Wave Hiking and don't just hope I draw the Sphere Mode or the Golem on my turn. Or maybe you've drawn the Golem and you think they're still going to make, a good amount of monsters. Like they're still going to make like a Desiree, a Varudras, a Phantom of Yubel, even through the Nib. And then you still, would be happy if you drew the Nib in combination with the Sparrow. And so, yeah, basically the point is, what I'm trying to say is I'm not sure if I fully optimize the non-engine in particular. But I do think that the 3 Spare Mode, the 3 Golem is good. I think that 1 Veiler and 1 Nib is good. I think you could play 3 Nib. I'm not sure about the Subversion, but it is very helpful if you lose the dice roll and you're going second and you need another search target off of the Diabel Star. But I feel like this could just be a 3rd Nib. I'm not sure about the side deck because I haven't tested this enough to say for sure. I do think that you can make rank 4s in this deck, and so Baguska could still be helpful. But I think you're really going to suffer against shifter decks still. Like there's only so much you can do to play around that. This deck does get hurt by Droll a lot harder than lots of other decks that might have only searched once and then been fine, or chained wanted to the Droll and then been fine. So I do think you do have to be concerned with the Droll. But I would say that the extra deck is pretty close to being good. I didn't show any of the combos with the Sol. You could argue that maybe you shouldn't play Debtors, or maybe you should side it instead of maining it, and that you should take out the Sol because it comes up the least often, and maybe go back to playing like a Zapper Shrimp, and then you could put in like another Nib or something, or even like another Tract or whatever. But Yeah, let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions for things that you think I should change about this that would make it better, or any experiences you've had while testing. And thanks for watching.